Today's reading comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 58, verses 6 through 8. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Thanks be to God. Well, this morning I'd like to begin a three-part sermon series, and as a part of these sermons I'd like to lift up some of the ministries and the activities of our congregation relative to the three goals that our administrative board established for us back in the back in last September. And so this morning I'd like to spend a few moments talking with you about homelessness and the work of our congregation in that regard. And over the next 2 Sundays, I'd like to talk a bit about our hopes and prayers for a ministry with women who are incarcerated as the state prison for women is slated to come to our city. And then to spend some time with you celebrating and rejoicing about our work with the local school, Abbott Downing, the one that's closest to us. This is a wonderful congregation that does many good and important things, and it's good to be aware and to celebrate. And of course, I hope as a part of this sermon series, I might awaken in you a desire to engage and be involved if you are not already involved in some of that work. So I won't have an altar call or anything, but if you feel led and inspired to be engaged in this work, I'll tell you what to do about that, and I hope that you'll get involved. So when I was thinking about homelessness, my mind went to the ancient prophet Isaiah. And in this chapter, he's being just a little critical of Israel's religious life. There was this practice of fasting. Now, I was tempted to research all of that and tell you all about it, but I got over that temptation. I didn't do it. But it seemed to be a part of their religious practice was a fast. And a fast then, as most fasts today, involve the giving up of something, but not just giving it up for the sake of not doing it, but to take the time that would have been devoted to that activity and use that time for introspection, for the forming of the inner life. If one is fasting from eating, you wouldn't just not eat, but you would intentionally take the time spent in food preparation for prayer, for reflection. So when Isaiah is critical of Israel's practice of fasting, he's pointing out that while Israel might be going through the outward expressions of spiritual discipline, that there was a profound disconnect, that the work of fasting was not inspiring those who were fasting to practice justice and kindness. The fast that God desires is that we live lives of compassion. And I think what Isaiah said to his generation as his time is a word that we would do well to be attentive to. Our worship of God should lead us to lives of service. And if it fails to do that, then it has failed. You see, worship isn't about singing the songs we like. That's important, and we do it. But they ought to be songs that inspire in us the deeper love toward things that are eternal. The worship of God is not just gathering with our friends here in a familiar place, although that is good. But our friendships ought to goad us on, not just to take care of ourselves, but to reach out especially to those who have difficulty caring for themselves. You see, what God really wants from us is an outward focus, a concern, and an engagement in the world where it hurts, that it might hurt less. And if we fail to do that, then little else really matters. Well, this morning I'd like to share with you a little bit about some of the things our congregation has done with regard to homelessness. When we first set our goals back in last May, the hope was that we as a congregation might be able to lift 2 families out of homelessness. But as the committee began to work at that task, they soon discovered that it was just too tall an order. It was far more than could be accomplished. So in their wisdom, the Homeless Initiative Task Force began to look at the other groups in the city, finding out what is going on, and then look for ways to engage and to be a part of that work. I did a little research in preparation for the sermon. I won't overload you with numbers, don't worry. But it seems that at any given time in the state of New Hampshire, there are about 5,000 people who are homeless. About 5,000 people who are homeless. And the average length of homelessness is about 50 days. That it takes about that long for people to figure out what to do to care for themselves and solve their problem. Now, in a state of, I think we have 1.2 million people in the state of New Hampshire, it seems to me that that's a reasonable number of people that we can and should be able to shepherd through their seasons of difficulty. So our homeless committee did an awful lot of community research. They spent a lot of time on the phone conversing with some of the groups in the city that are doing a lot. They spent some time talking to people in the Friends program and the city welfare office. They spent time conversing with the people at the Homeless Resource Center and with the Coalition to End Homelessness. And they spent some time in conversation with families and transitions. And I think we've managed to get ourselves on their speed dial. And when there's a need, they call us. And what a privilege it is to be a part of their good and important work. So I have some notes here from my lovely spouse, Kathy. Thank you for these. And she estimates that we've probably spent about 37 hours directly engaged in this work, raising money and finding things. Not so long ago, we got a call. Someone found a place. Her 50 days of homelessness came to an end. She had an apartment, but she had no furniture. Pat and Mike, thank you for sharing what you had. And Jeff and Dan and Rick and got in a truck and went out to Rochester and grabbed the furniture, brought it back, and some of it was gifted to this woman who is no longer homeless. And there's a whole bunch more in our garage, so if you know of somebody. So I want to tell you that that's important, and I'm grateful and I am proud. Others in our congregation have helped with moving, making a difference, doing what we can. You see, the work of homelessness is just too large for one congregation and for one group to do all on their own. I continue to be amazed at our sisters and brothers in faith at South Congregational Church and at First Congregational Church. For over a decade, those two faith communities transformed their Sunday school rooms through the winter into an emergency cold weather shelter. And I know that many of you gave of your time to help make that program happen. And two things that we're presently working on now is our congregation has been greatly involved in the formation of Family Promise, which is a community-wide effort to provide emergency shelters for families. Now, getting a big program like that off the ground is not easy, and it's taken years. And we're not quite there yet, right, Janet? We've got a few more hurdles to go, and I know sometimes we get a little impatient and we want it done, and we want it done now. But it's important that we do it right, and that we do it carefully, and we do it as we are able. So I'm very pleased and very proud of the work that's being done. And you're going to find from time to time here in the life of our church little notes, little requests. Gail Page gave me a note just this morning. I bet you've given it to everybody already, right? So I don't need to read it, but things that are needed. Got a call just the other day from someone who's homeless, just getting housing, suffering with COPD disease. That's a respiratory ailment. And they need an air conditioner in order to make it through the summer. So from time to time, you're going to hear requests, and I hope that you will respond. And I'm also glad to share with you today that we have 16 people? Where's Bill? 18 members of our congregation will be going down to the new resource center to help ready that place for its important ministry. Our worship of God should lead us to lives of service. And if our worship of God does not do that, then our worship has failed. So I'm very proud of what you've done, and I want to encourage all of you to find ways to engage and be a part of this work. I have one more story that I want to tell you. It's not quite related to homelessness directly, but I think it's a powerful story, a powerful way in which God worked through a United Methodist church. When I was down in Washington for a church meeting, we did a little tour, and we stopped by a United Methodist church in downtown Washington, D.C. And it's a familiar story. It's a story of a large urban church that over the years, its membership dwindled as many people moved out of the city into the suburbs. A congregation a building that was built to house 1,000 worshipers had dwindled down to about 50. They had this big, grand sanctuary and 2 large educational buildings. They had more building than they could afford, more expenses than they could manage. It's a familiar story in so many of our United Methodist congregations. But this is one with a happy ending. You want to hear it? Well, the city of Washington is undergoing great change, that as many people left the city, it got run down, and now a lot of millennials are choosing not to live in the suburbs anymore, but wanting to live in the cities, and they're experiencing a great deal of renewal, and business and activity is coming back. So I don't know how it all pieced together, but this congregation connected with a developer, and the 2 large buildings that they weren't using were torn down. The corporation built a beautiful office complex, and the church maintained a 10% ownership in this corporation. The offices are rented out at a pretty good profit, and the church receives 10% of the revenue from that corporation. With the infusion of those resources, they were able to take the building that they kept for themselves, make it handicapped accessible, make it usable, and to continue a vital and powerful ministry downtown in the city of Washington. Now, the only part where this story connects with the theme of the day is that the congregation has grown. They've come from about 50 up to about 125. And just as the pastor finished telling us this story, she smiled. She said, "I'm very pleased to tell you that about 10% of our worshiping congregation every Sunday is homeless. And they find a welcome here." So that's a success story. And I wanted to share that with you as a part of this sermon, because it reminds us that even when things seem impossible, when things seem like we cannot find a way, God's promise and God's hands can guide us. And it's a wonderful story of renewal. And it just made me feel good. And I wanted you to feel good as well. Amen.